Tonight, we're drifting toward a place that sits at the edge of the ordinary world, a stretch of desert where heat shimmers like a mirage and distant lights can look like stars that forgot where to rest. This is a bedtime story about Area 51, not as a courtroom argument, not as a claim, but as a quiet tour through rumours, declassified breadcrumbs, and the human talent for turning blanks into legends. So get comfortable. Let your thoughts slow down like tyres on soft sand. And if your eyes close before we reach the last chapter, that's the secret, working exactly as planned. The Nevada desert is a vast, patient thing. In the daytime, it looks almost simple. Wide open land, pale mountains, scrub that keeps itself small, and a sky so big it feels like it has its own gravity. The light is sharp, honest, and a little merciless, as if every stone and every dry plant is being gently asked to introduce itself. But as evening arrives, the desert starts doing what it does best. The heat loosens its grip. The air that spent all day shimmering begins to settle, and the world gets quieter in layers. First, the obvious sounds fade. The distant road noise, the occasional engine, the small everyday bustle that can reach even lonely places. Then the subtler sounds soften too. The faint rustle of wind, the tiny movements of living things hiding in the brush. What's left is a calm that doesn't feel empty so much as deliberate, like the land is taking a slow breath and holding it. If you've ever been somewhere truly open, somewhere with enough space for your thoughts to echo, you know the feeling. Your mind gets a little wider. Your worries, which can feel huge indoors, begin to look smaller against the sheer scale of everything. Out here, the horizon isn't a line so much as a suggestion. It keeps retreating, no matter how far you stare. And it's in that retreating horizon that the desert becomes a natural home for mystery. Not because it's magical, not because it's trying to hide anything. The desert simply has the right ingredients: distance, silence, and time. It has places that are hard to reach and harder to watch. It has valleys where sound disappears. It has mountains that hold back roads and signals. It has stretches of land where a single set of tire tracks can look like a confession, and where a lone light at night can feel like a whisper. You can imagine driving there, not fast, not nervously, just steadily. The kind of drive where you don't keep checking the clock because the minutes don't feel important. The kind of road that doesn't offer much in the way of distraction. The kind that lets your brain unwind simply because there's nothing to chase. The car moves through dusk. The sky changes colour slowly, almost politely. Warm tones drain away, and cooler ones take their place. Soft grey-blue, then deeper blue, then the first hint of black at the top of everything. The desert floor, which looked detailed in sunlight, turns into a gentler shape. Darker ground, darker mountains, softer edges. You start to see the world more in silhouettes. The land becomes a calm cutout against the sky. And then the stars arrive, not all at once. At first it's just a few, faint pinpricks like someone testing the lights. Then more. Then so many that you begin to remember very quietly that the sky is not meant to be blank. City life can convince you that the night is mostly empty. But out here, the darkness reveals what the brightness was hiding. That the universe is unreasonably crowded. Some stars are steady. Others seem to twinkle, not because they're nervous, but because the air between you and them is alive. Tiny currents, tiny shifts, a gentle, invisible weather. Planets can look different, calmer, more sure of themselves. Satellites might slip by if you watch long enough, like small moving thoughts. Everything up there is doing what it does, regardless of what you're doing. And that's another way the desert calms you. It doesn't care much about your schedule. It doesn't push. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand a response. It simply exists, and invites you to match its pace. If you roll down the window at night, the air can feel cool and clean in a way that's hard to describe without sounding overly dramatic. It's not perfumed like a forest. It's not salty like a coastline. It's just dry, clear and honest. You might smell dust faintly. You might smell sage if you're near it, but mostly you smell nothing, which is strangely soothing, like the world has stopped cluttering your senses. Even the wind out here feels slower. When it moves through brush, it doesn't hiss so much as whisper. When it crosses open ground, it doesn't roar. It sighs. And if it's still, if you catch one of those rare moments where the air seems to stop entirely, you can feel how complete silence isn't really a lack of sound. It's a presence. It's a blanket. Now and then you might hear the tiny life of the desert. Not much, but enough to remind you that quiet places aren't dead places. Far off, a coyote might call, and the sound will stretch across the miles as if the air is carrying it carefully like a fragile cup. There might be a faint scurry in the brush, a brief flutter of wings, a soft clicking sound from insects doing insect things, and yet the overall feeling remains steady, like the desert is built to help you let go. That's the mood we're entering tonight, a place where your mind naturally starts to imagine what could be beyond the next ridge, what could be hidden in the low valleys, what might be tucked behind a mountain that looks ordinary in daylight, but at night becomes a black wall. The desert doesn't invent stories, it just gives them room. And sometimes, in the distance, there are lights. Not the bright, friendly lights of a town, not the warm window glow of a neighbourhood. These are different. They're fewer, sharper, more isolated. They might be steady like a star that fell a little too low. They might blink in a rhythm that feels intentional. They might appear and vanish as the road curves, teasing the eye with uncertainty. Your brain notices them, and without asking permission starts building possibilities. It's an old survival habit, this need to interpret. A moving shadow could be danger. A strange sound could be important. The mind would rather guess wrong than ignore something that matters. In the modern world, that habit turns into curiosity, an urge to label the unknown before it gets too big. Out here, where distance is hard to judge and the night hides details, a single light can become many things depending on your mood. A tower, a building, a vehicle, an aircraft, a reflection, a trick of perspective, or something you don't have a name for. And that's where the desert becomes a perfect stage, not for fear, but for wonder. Wonder is quieter than it looks in movies. It isn't always bright-eyed excitement. Sometimes it's a low hum in your chest when you look at something and feel your own scale shift. Sometimes it's the sensation of thinking, I don't know what that is, and somehow that's okay. You can even feel wonder while you're sleepy. Sleepy wonder is gentle. It doesn't demand answers. It doesn't demand proof. It just lets the unknown be unknown, like a closed book on a bedside table. You don't need to open it tonight. You can simply enjoy the fact that it exists. Now imagine continuing the drive. The road narrows, the scenery gets even more minimal. The occasional sign appears, then disappears again behind you. The car's headlights carve a soft tunnel in the air, illuminating the asphalt, the shoulder, the occasional marker post. Beyond that tunnel is darkness that feels thick but not threatening, like velvet. If you pull over for a moment and turn off the engine, the quiet becomes almost physical. The sound of the cooling car ticks faintly, then fades. Your ears adjust. You start hearing the softest things, the distant wind, your own breathing, the little shift of fabric as you settle. And when you look up again, the sky seems even larger because you're no longer moving through it. You're paused beneath it. It's hard to feel important in a place like this, but it's easy to feel connected. The desert has a way of reminding you that life is a small, warm light in a big, cool universe. That thought can sound lonely if you hold it tightly, but if you hold it loosely, it's comforting. It means you don't have to carry everything. You don't have to control everything. You're allowed to be small tonight. You're allowed to rest. In stories, deserts are often portrayed as harsh, and they can be. Heat can be dangerous. Distance can be unforgiving. But at night, when you're safe and warm and simply imagining the desert becomes something else, a soft expanse that asks very little of you. It's a landscape that doesn't overwhelm you with details. It doesn't clutter your attention. And because it's so uncluttered, it becomes the perfect place to set down the heavy parts of your day. The day is full of sharp edges, notifications, tasks, conversations, expectations. Even good things can feel noisy. Even fun can be tiring. But the desert at night is the opposite of that. It's one long, slow, quiet note. And beneath that note, a particular kind of human thought begins to drift in. The thought of hidden places. Not hidden like a child behind a curtain. Hidden like a vault. Hidden like a locked drawer. Hidden like a door in a hallway you pass every day but never open. A place can be hidden simply by being far away, by being difficult to reach, by being surrounded with rules and warnings and polite distant authority. A place can be hidden simply by not being talked about. And the less something is talked about, the more the imagination talks around it. This is how legends begin, not with certainty, but with silence. Silence is a blank screen. The mind, faced with blankness, starts projecting. It projects shapes. It projects stories. It projects fear sometimes, and hope other times, and curiosity almost always. In the desert, that projection feels stronger because the landscape cooperates. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't correct. It doesn't offer a convenient explanation. It just watches, quietly, while you wonder. You might picture a distant ridge and think, what's behind that? You might picture a valley and think, what's down there? You might picture a long flat stretch and think, that would make a perfect runway. And then the mind does what it does. It connects dots, even if the dots are miles apart. But here's the gentle truth, the bedtime truth. You don't have to connect anything tonight. You can simply float in the atmosphere of open land and big sky. You can enjoy how the desert makes everything feel slower, wider, softer. You can let your thoughts wander in the way they do when you're almost asleep. Curious, dreamy, uncommitted. No urgency, no pressure, no need to solve the mystery. Just a quiet road through an open world. Just the sense of a faraway place where lights can appear and disappear and leave behind a question that fades into the night like breath on cold air. And as you imagine that road, steady, smooth, unhurried, you might notice your own body beginning to match it, your shoulders dropping a little, your jaw unclenching, your breath lengthening, the way it naturally does when you stop trying to manage it, in and out, in and out. The desert is very good at this. It teaches you without words that there is time, that nothing needs to be forced, that the night can hold whatever you don't want to carry. So for now, let the vastness do its work. Let the darkness be soft. Let the distance be calming instead of unsettling. And let the simple fact of open space, miles and miles of it, make your mind feel like it has somewhere to rest. Because out there, under that wide sky that refuses to be small, the world feels quiet enough for sleep. And that's all we need for the moment. Area 51 is such a strange little phrase when you slow down and look at it. It doesn't sound like a prophecy. It doesn't sound like a monster. It doesn't sound like a myth you'd tell around a fire. It sounds like something you'd find printed in tiny ink on the corner of a manila folder. Plain, practical, almost bored with itself. A label, a reference, a way of saying, this goes here, without ever saying why. And maybe that's part of the spell. because the most powerful mysteries don't always arrive with dramatic music. Sometimes they arrive disguised as paperwork. Sometimes the door to a legend looks like a filing cabinet drawer. Area 51 is not a poetic name. It doesn't have the romance of Atlantis or the menace of Bermuda Triangle. It isn't a fairy tale word. It's a code, and codes do something peculiar to the human mind. They suggest there's a system behind them. They imply order, intention, a larger map you're not allowed to see. A code makes you feel like you're standing outside a room where important people are speaking softly. And the moment you feel excluded, curiosity wakes up. Curiosity is gentle by nature, but it can also be very stubborn. It quietly pushes its nose against locked doors. It leans toward curtains. It reads between lines. It notices what isn't being said, then circles it like a cat around a closed box. Area 51 became famous in a way most codes never do. Most codes stay where they were born, on documents, in memos, in technical language. They do their job and then disappear. But this one escaped into the world, like a classified stamp that somehow wandered into the sunlight and got photographed. And once a name like that reaches the public imagination, it stops belonging to any one place. It becomes a symbol, and symbols, once they take root, grow their own branches. Think about how you first heard the name. It might have come from a documentary narrator with a serious voice, or a late-night radio show, or a film where the desert is always lit with eerie blue, or a joke. Because Area 51 is one of those rare mysteries that can be both spooky and funny, depending on the mood of the room. A punchline is a kind of passport. When something becomes a joke, it becomes familiar, and once it becomes familiar, it slips into everyday culture like a pebble in a shoe. You keep noticing it, even if you're not thinking about it. People say Area 51, and they don't just mean a geographic location. They mean secrecy. They mean government silence. They mean rumours. They mean that tantalising feeling of something just beyond your reach. The phrase becomes shorthand for there is more happening in the world than you can see. And that thought, on its own, is intoxicating. Because the ordinary world can feel very flat sometimes. Bills, errands, deadlines, the same streets, the same rooms, the same worries repeating like a song you didn't choose. A legend offers depth. It offers an extra dimension. It suggests that behind the plain curtain of daily life, there might be a hidden stage where the real drama happens. Now, to be clear, and we can keep this calm and sleepy, we don't have to decide tonight what is true and what isn't. We don't have to turn this into an argument. We can treat it the way you treat a distant mountain at night. You can admire its shape without needing to climb it. What matters for the feeling of this story is the way the name behaves in the mind. Area 51 is like a small key that fits a very old lock in the human psyche. The lock labelled forbidden knowledge. There's something ancient in that hunger. Across history, people have always suspected there are hidden chambers in reality, hidden rooms in the temple, hidden pages in the book, hidden teachings revealed only to the initiated. Sometimes those teachings were spiritual, sometimes they were political, sometimes they were scientific. But the shape of the desire is steady. Tell me what they won't tell me. Modern secrecy wears modern clothing. Instead of priests and scrolls, we imagine briefings and protocols and secure facilities. But the emotional engine is the same, and a name like Area 51 feeds that engine perfectly, because it's so oddly impersonal. It doesn't describe what happens there. It doesn't even pretend to. It simply points and says, this is a place you are not invited into. And then the mind reacts the way it always reacts to a closed door. It imagines what must be so valuable that someone would guard it. The mind is a builder. Give it a blank space and it will put furniture in it. Give it a mystery and it will write characters. Give it silence and it will compose a soundtrack. So, in the cultural imagination, Area 51 becomes a landscape of possibilities, a runway stretching into darkness, a chain-link fence humming with heat in the daytime, cold and glittering at night, a guard shack with a light inside it, dim, unwavering, like an eye that never fully closes, a distant hangar door the size of a cliff face, vehicles without markings, radios speaking in codes, people wearing badges that catch the sun like tiny mirrors, and of course, the most famous possibility of all, that the secrets inside aren't just about technology, but about beings, visitors, something not human, not from here, stored away like evidence in a locked drawer. Even if you don't believe that, the image is powerful. It taps into wonder and fear at the same time, the way the ocean does. The ocean isn't necessarily hiding monsters, but it still feels like it could, because it's deep and it doesn't explain itself. Area 51, as a name, suggests depth in the same way. It suggests the world has a basement, and basements do strange things to the imagination. A basement is where you put the things you don't want in the living room. Old furniture, old memories, boxes you're not ready to sort. Sometimes a basement is just storage, but it always carries a hint of secrecy, because it's below, and below feels hidden even when it isn't. So the name becomes a kind of basement label for the entire nation's curiosity, stored somewhere out of sight. And the more a culture repeats a name, the more texture it gains. At some point, Area 51 stopped being just a term and started becoming a setting, a stage, a genre. You can feel it when you hear the phrase. It often arrives with a tone, half serious, half playful. People smile because it's fun to imagine. People lower their voice because it's fun to pretend. Even disbelief can be delivered with a grin, because the legend has become part of the shared language of the modern world. It's a campfire story for the age of satellites and servers, and that's another reason the name sticks. It connects the ancient and the modern. We still have the same brains that once watched firelight dance on cave walls and imagined gods moving in the shadows. Only now the shadows have different shapes. The gods have been replaced by unknown craft. The temple has been replaced by restricted airspace. The sacred texts have been replaced by declassified documents, and the priests, if you want to keep the metaphor, are engineers, officials, and people who speak in careful sentences. But the emotional rhythm is the same: a claim, a denial, a rumour, a leaked page, a blurry photo, a witness who sounds sincere, a witness who sounds confused, a silence that could mean nothing, or could mean everything, and the name that holds it all together like a stitch: Area 51. Sometimes a name becomes famous because it's beautiful. This one became famous because it's blank, because it refuses to satisfy you. It's a label that creates hunger rather than relief, and hunger becomes attention. Attention becomes repetition. Repetition becomes myth. Now, if you want a softer way to think about it as we drift towards sleep, imagine the name as a kind of lullaby for the curious mind. Not a lullaby with sweet words, but a lullaby with a gentle rhythm. Area 51. Area 51. It has a cadence. It breaks into syllables that feel clean and measured. It's easy to say. It lands neatly in the mouth, like a puzzle piece that fits. And because it's easy to repeat, people repeat it. In conversations, in jokes, in headlines, in whispered what-if moments, in the background of the internet, where stories replicate like little digital spores. The internet especially gave the name a second life. It became a home for long threads and strange images, for communities that collect anomalies like seashells. In that world, Area 51 isn't just a place. It's a folder where everyone dumps their fascination, a communal dream. And dreams don't demand evidence the way courtrooms do. Dreams run on feeling. Dreams run on symbolism. Dreams run on narrative gravity. So when you hear Area 51, you might not be hearing a location. You might be hearing your own mind asking for more magic in the world. Not necessarily alien magic, just the magic of mystery. Because even if the true story behind the name is practical, aircraft development, testing, secrecy for strategic reasons, the symbol remains. The symbol says there are things you don't know, and that is both humbling and thrilling. Humbling because it reminds you the world is large. Thrilling because it reminds you the world is not fully mapped. And you can let that be a comfort tonight. It means you don't have to have everything figured out. It means uncertainty is not a failure. It's a natural state. The universe is not a neatly labelled cupboard. It's a vast desert sky, filled with lights you can't name. So the name Area 51 floats there in the mind like a distant beacon, not necessarily calling you to action, just calling you to wonder. It's an invitation to imagine hidden rooms and long corridors and locked doors, yes, but it's also an invitation to slow down and feel that delicious sleepy edge between knowing and not knowing. And at bedtime, that edge is a good place to rest, because sleep itself is a kind of Area 51 of the mind, a hidden facility you enter every night, where strange images are tested, where memory is processed, where reality becomes flexible, and where you wake up later without fully knowing what happened in the dark. So tonight, as the name lingers softly in the air, you don't have to chase it. You can simply let it hover. Let it be a distant sign on a desert road. Let it be the suggestion of a locked drawer you don't need to open. The world can keep its secrets for now, and you can keep your softness. You can let your eyelids grow heavy while the phrase, plain, coded, oddly famous, drifts farther away, becoming less a mystery to solve and more a gentle background hum, like wind over sand, like a far-off engine fading into night. Groom Lake sounds like an ordinary name at first, almost too ordinary for the way it's spoken about. Two simple words that could belong to a picnic spot or a little town with a diner and a gas station. But the place itself, the way people describe it, has a different kind of texture in the imagination. It's a dry lake bed in Nevada, one of those shimmering pale flats where ancient water once rested, and where the remaining surface still looks like it remembers what it used to be. A dry lake bed is a peculiar kind of landscape, because it's both empty and complete at the same time. It doesn't have the comforting clutter of a forest, where trees break up sightlines and tell your brain you're enclosed, you're sheltered, you're held. And it doesn't have the busy detail of a city, where your eyes and ears are constantly offered something to grab onto. A dry lake bed gives you almost nothing, just a wide, flat expanse, a light-coloured floor stretching out beneath an enormous sky. But almost nothing is exactly what makes it feel so strange. Because when the land becomes that simple, the small things become loud. A single moving dot in the distance will catch your attention like a magnet. A faint glimmer might become the most interesting object in the world. A line on the horizon can look like a boundary between two realities, and the flatness itself can feel unreal. Your mind is so used to texture, hills, trees, buildings, that when it's given a surface that looks like a blank sheet of paper, it begins to behave differently. It starts to notice the horizon more. It starts to notice the sky. It starts to fill in the quiet with its own thoughts. In the day, Groom Lake would appear almost blinding. The sun in Nevada is not gentle. It doesn't flatter. It illuminates. It turns pale ground into a mirror of heat. The air above a dry lake bed can shimmer so intensely that distant objects seem to float, and the world wobbles as if it's being viewed through water. That shimmer is a kind of magic trick the desert performs. It's not supernatural, just physics and heat, but it creates the feeling of distortion, the sense that the place is bending light, bending distance, bending certainty. And that feeling, even if you know the explanation, is still powerful. It makes you question your own perception in a soft, sleepy way. At sunset, the lake bed changes personality. The harsh white becomes cream and gold. Shadows stretch and soften. The mountains around it, dark ridges and blunt shapes, begin to look like silhouettes cut from paper and placed carefully against the sky. If clouds are present, they can turn pink, then violet, then a dim blue-grey, like ink spreading slowly through water. And as night settles, the lake bed becomes a different kind of blank. The ground turns dark and its edges become harder to measure. The horizon line becomes more conceptual than visible. If the moon is bright, it can paint the surface with a pale glow and make it look like a quiet, sleeping sea. If there's no moon, the lake bed disappears almost entirely and the sky takes over. Stars become the main feature, and the earth becomes something you feel rather than see. This is one reason a place like Groom Lake catches the human imagination. It doesn't behave like the landscapes most people live in. It doesn't offer comfort through familiarity. It offers something rarer: space. And space does two things to a person. First, it calms you, because it reduces the noise. Your senses aren't being constantly tugged in 100 directions. There's less to track, less to manage, less to interpret. Your nervous system can exhale. But second, space makes you curious, because it feels like an unanswered question. A flat expanse suggests movement. It suggests something travelling across it. It suggests a runway so long it could swallow sound. It suggests that if something unusual happened there, something fast, something experimental, something hard to recognise, you might not be able to make sense of it just by glimpsing it. You'd see a shape against the sky, a streak, a light, and then it would be gone. In a place like that, sight becomes both powerful and unreliable. You can see far, yes, but judging what you're seeing is another matter. The desert can make distance slippery. A small object nearby can look like a large object far away. A bright light can feel closer than it is. A moving thing can appear to hover because there's nothing around it to give you context. This is how mystery is born, not necessarily from the extraordinary, but from the way ordinary perception behaves in extraordinary conditions. And Groom Lake sits in conditions that invite exactly that. Now, imagine the practical appeal of it too. If you wanted a place to test aircraft, especially aircraft the rest of the world isn't meant to know about yet, you would want certain things. You would want remoteness. You would want predictable weather much of the year. You would want distances that discourage casual visitors. You would want wide open approaches and clear lines of sight. And you would want somewhere you can land, take off, and operate without building a runway as long as a river. A dry lake bed offers that like a gift. It's as if the earth itself prepared a natural airfield, huge, flat, and unbothered by potholes or trees. Even the idea of it feels surreal. This pale, ancient lake turned into a giant minimalist stage where machines can be tested against the sky. And if you think about what that means, it's almost funny in a quiet way. Not laugh out loud funny, more like the gentle irony of the universe. Something as secretive and modern as advanced aviation leaning on something as old and natural as a dried up lake. Cutting-edge technology riding on prehistoric geography. If you stand at the edge of such a place in your imagination, you can almost feel how it would change your sense of scale. The lake bed would stretch out so far that your eyes would keep travelling even after your brain thought it had reached the end. It would feel like stepping into emptiness, except the emptiness is solid and it holds you. You might see faint markings, old tracks, subtle lines, variations in colour where the surface has cracked and reformed. Dry lake beds often have that delicate patterning, like ceramic glaze or a map of tiny hexagons, a geometry made by drying and time and repetition. And in that geometry there's a kind of quiet art, the sort of art nature makes when no one is watching. The air would be thin with smell, not much fragrance, just dust and dryness, And maybe that faint mineral scent you notice when the ground is very old and the air is very clean. If there's wind, it would move with purpose, sweeping across the flat with nothing to slow it down, making the whole place feel like a single exhale. And then there's the surrounding terrain. Groom Lake isn't just a flat surface, it's cradled by mountains, and that matters. Mountains create privacy, they block sightlines, they create pockets of space where things can happen out of view, they turn distance into defense without needing walls. When you place a dry lake bed within a bowl of desert ranges, it becomes a natural amphitheatre, except the audience is the sky, and the performances are brief, fast and often far away. It's easy to see how such a place would attract stories. A person sees a light at night moving strangely. They cannot judge its distance. They cannot recognize its shape. It accelerates, or seems to. It disappears behind a ridge. The person tells someone else. The story picks up a second layer. A little more certainty, a little more drama. Then a third layer. Then the internet layer, where stories become polished and repeated until they begin to sound like sworn testimony. But again, we don't have to treat any of that as true tonight. We can treat it as weather, cultural weather, mist sliding along a ridge, the human mind doing what it does when it sees something it can't name. Groom Lake, in that sense, is less a place where secrets are and more a place where the feeling of secrecy makes sense. The landscape itself supports it. It's remote, it's stark, it's wide, it's hard to casually observe. And because it's so open, it feels like it should be easy to see what's happening, yet something about it suggests the opposite. That contradiction is delicious to the imagination. It's like looking into a clear window and still being unable to tell what's inside because the light reflects back at you. You think you should know, and you don't, and that gap becomes a story. Now picture the lake bed at night again, because night is where bedtime stories live. Imagine a stillness so complete that even your thoughts feel louder than usual. Imagine stars scattered across the sky like salt thrown across black velvet. Imagine the mountains as dark shapes, patient and indifferent. Imagine the flat ground as a quiet expanse that could be empty, or could be waiting. In the far distance, maybe there are a few lights, not many, just enough to remind you that humans have built something somewhere beyond the ridges. The lights might be steady, they might flicker, they might seem to rearrange as you knowingly shift your gaze. And in that quiet, the mind does a gentle thing. It starts to wonder what kinds of human lives unfold in a place like that. Not alien lives, human ones. People waking early, people drinking coffee under fluorescent lights, people checking lists, following protocols, working on machines with careful hands, people with families, with tired eyes, with jokes shared in low voices. People who go home at the end of a shift and become ordinary again, like actors stepping off a stage. Because whatever is true about Groom Lake and all the stories around it, this remains likely. Much of the reality is mundane. Work, procedure, routine, maintenance, planning, safety, engineering. The unglamorous effort that makes the modern world run. And yet, because it's hidden, because it's distant, because you can't easily look in and see. The mundane becomes mythic in the public imagination, like hearing music through a wall. You can't make out the lyrics, so you invent them. The lake bed itself becomes a kind of symbol in this story, a blank surface where anything could be projected, a screen, a canvas, a quiet stage. And there's something oddly soothing about a symbol like that. A blank stage doesn't demand that you perform. A blank surface doesn't demand that you solve it. It just holds space. That's what Groom Lake can be for us tonight. A held space in the mind. A wide, flat expanse where your thoughts can drift without bumping into anything sharp. If your day was crowded, let the lake bed be empty. If your mind was noisy, let the lake bed be quiet. If you've been holding too much, let the lake bed be wide enough to set it down. You can imagine the pale flatness stretching out, smooth and unobtrusive, like a giant calm breath across the desert floor. You can imagine the mountains standing guard like old, silent librarians. You can imagine the sky overhead, endlessly patient, endlessly wide, watching without judgment. And you can let the idea of secrets become less about fear and more about the gentle truth that the world is bigger than your current understanding. That's not a threat. It's a relief. It means you don't have to know everything tonight. You can let the lake bed rest. You can let your thoughts rest. And somewhere in the distance, far away, behind ridges and fences and policies, the desert keeps being the desert. The sky keeps being the sky. And the pale, ancient lake bed keeps lying there like a quiet page in a book you don't need to finish before you fall asleep. There are different kinds of secrets in the world, and your body can usually tell the difference before your mind can. Some secrets feel like tight knots. They make the shoulders rise. They make the breath shorten. They carry a faint metallic taste of danger. Something withheld because revealing it might cause harm, embarrassment, conflict, or loss. These secrets vibrate with tension, like a wire pulled too tight. But other secrets feel softer. They feel like closed drawers in a quiet house, like a book you haven't read yet resting patiently on a shelf. They aren't threatening. They're simply private, unopened, waiting. When people talk about a place like Area 51, they often blend these different kinds of secrecy together until the whole thing becomes one big dramatic cloud. But if we slow down, slow enough for bedtime, those layers begin to separate. And once they separate, the mystery becomes calmer, more understandable, less sharp. One kind of secret is the official kind. Official secrets are not romantic. They're not mystical. They usually have boring origins made of meetings and memos and policies. Official secrecy is built for strategy. It's designed to protect an advantage, reduce risk, or prevent something from becoming useful to an opponent. The reasons can vary, but the structure is often the same. There's a system, there are rules, there's a chain of permission. Official secrets tend to live in ordinary things: a binder, a database, a secure room with beige walls and buzzing lights, a badge that works on some doors and doesn't work on others, a careful email that says less than it could, a conversation that ends when someone new enters the room. In the official world, secrecy is a procedure, like washing hands before surgery. It's a habit, a routine, a performed caution, and because it's routine, it can be weirdly unexciting from the inside. The people who handle official secrets often don't experience them as mysteries. They experience them as work. There's a schedule, there are deadlines, there are safety checks. There's the slow, meticulous grind of making complicated things function. From the outside, it can look like a vault of wonders. From the inside, it can look like a spreadsheet with a sensitive file name. The other kind of secret is the human kind. Human secrets aren't always about strategy. They're about meaning. They're about emotion. They're about the mind's relationship to uncertainty. They're what happens when we stand in front of a blank space and the blank space stares back. Human beings have a special relationship with the unknown. We don't like empty rooms in our understanding. We don't like unanswered questions that just sit there, breathing quietly in the corner. Our brains are built to fill in gaps, not because we're foolish, but because, historically, it was safer to guess than to ignore. If you heard a sound in the dark and didn't know what it was, guessing predator kept your ancestors alive. If you saw a shape moving and couldn't identify it, assuming it mattered was often the right move. The brain evolved under pressure, and pressure creates pattern finders. So when we face modern mysteries, especially ones wrapped in official secrecy, our ancient pattern-finding brain wakes up like a dog hearing keys jingle. It listens, it leans forward, It starts connecting dots even when the dots are far apart. This is where the two kinds of secrets overlap and become something larger than either one. A restricted place exists. That's an official fact. There are fences, signs, policies, and real reasons to keep certain projects hidden, especially in military and aviation contexts. That part is easy to imagine because it's practical. It's consistent with how institutions operate. But then the human mind comes in with its own needs and its own artistry. The mind doesn't just want to know what is happening. It wants to know what it means. It wants narrative. It wants purpose. It wants a shape it can hold. And when information is missing, the mind doesn't just sit politely and wait. It begins to create. This creation isn't always conscious. You don't sit down and say, I will now invent a myth. It's subtler than that. It's more like your imagination starts auditioning possibilities the way a casting director auditions actors. A light in the sky becomes, maybe it's a plane. A plane that looks unfamiliar becomes, maybe it's experimental. Experimental becomes, maybe it's secret. Secret becomes, maybe it's not ours. And not ours is where the imagination changes costume completely and steps into the world of visitors, recovered craft, hidden alliances, and the idea that the truth is too huge for regular people to handle. That's a dramatic leap, and it's important to say, softly, calmly, that a dramatic leap isn't the same as a proven one. But we don't need to fight with that tonight. We don't have to debate it. We can simply notice it, the way you notice how dreams transform ordinary objects into symbols. In a dream, a doorway isn't just a doorway. It's a transition, a boundary, a threat or a promise. A mirror isn't just glass, it's identity. A hallway isn't just architecture, it's time stretching out. In the same way, in the public imagination, a fence is never just a fence. It's a statement. It says, there is a line, there is an inside, there is an outside. And the moment you create a circle of inside, you create 1,000 stories about what's being protected. It's almost automatic. And the more serious the warning signs, the more the mind's story engine revs. Because human secrecy has its own logic. If you are hiding something, it must be important. If it's important, it must be extraordinary. If it's extraordinary, it might rewrite everything. And if it might rewrite everything, then of course powerful people would want to control it. This is the psychological ladder that many people climb without realizing it. Each rung feels reasonable in isolation, but the top of the ladder can end far above the ground, among clouds made of assumptions. Again, no judgment. This is just what minds do. The tricky part is that official secrecy makes a perfect greenhouse for human secrecy. Official secrecy provides real gaps, missing information, vague statements, careful language, closed records, limited access, and sometimes outright refusal to comment. Those gaps are facts. They're real. They exist. And human secrecy grows in those gaps. It's like a plant that doesn't need much light. It only needs space. When there's a lack of information, the imagination doesn't just fill it with random noise. It fills it with the most emotionally satisfying explanation available. That explanation might be frightening, because fear is vivid and sticky. Or it might be wondrous, because wonder makes life feel bigger. Often it's both at once, because the biggest myths tend to contain two flavors, terror and awe. That's why stories about hidden places so often pull toward aliens or ancient powers or world-changing technologies. Those themes hit the deepest human buttons. They offer drama, purpose, and the feeling of standing near a cosmic secret. And that feeling can be strangely comforting, not because it's true, but because it gives the mind a structure. If you've ever felt lost in ordinary life, lost in meaning, lost in routine, lost in the repetitive hum of days, you might understand why people love hidden world narratives. A hidden world suggests a grander plot. It suggests your confusion might have an explanation. It suggests the universe isn't just random. It's organized, and someone knows the plan. That desire is heartfelt. It comes from the longing for coherence. But bedtime is a special time. At bedtime, we don't need coherence. We need calm. So here's a gentler way to hold all of this. Official secrets are real, and they can be practical. Human secrets are also real, and they can be psychological. And you don't have to choose one as the only truth to understand why certain places become legendary. A place like Area 51 becomes a meeting point between systems and stories, between engineering and imagination, between policy and projection, between what is known by a few and wondered about by many. And when you see it that way, the whole thing becomes less scary and more human, almost tender in a strange way. Because look what's happening really. A group of people says, some of this is not for public discussion, and a much larger group of people responds, then we will tell stories until our thirst is satisfied. It's like the mind's equivalent of tapping on a wall to hear if there's a room behind it. Sometimes there is a room, sometimes it's just pipes, but the tapping continues because the act of wondering is pleasurable in itself. Wonder is the mind stretching, and stretching feels alive. Now imagine secrecy as a kind of darkness. Not the bad kind, not the panicky kind, the calm kind. The kind of darkness you have in your room right now, or the kind you can create by closing your eyes. In this darkness, you can't see everything. But that doesn't mean threat. It simply means rest. In the daytime, we demand that everything be visible. Schedules, plans, explanations, conclusions. We live in a world of harsh lights and constant knowing. At night, the world teaches a different lesson. You don't have to see everything to be safe. You don't have to understand everything to be okay. You can let some things remain out of focus. This is not surrender, it's permission. So if your mind wants to wander toward the idea of hidden files and closed doors, you can let it. And then you can soften it. You can remind yourself, much of secrecy is paperwork. Much of mystery is misinterpretation. Much of legend is a human response to blank spaces. And none of that requires you to tense your body. Inhale slowly. Exhale slowly. Secrets in the end are just boundaries. And boundaries are everywhere. Your skin is a boundary. Your home is a boundary. Your locked phone is a boundary. Even sleep is a boundary, between waking logic and dreaming symbolism. Every night you cross into a place where information behaves differently. In sleep, your mind becomes a storyteller. It takes fragments and turns them into scenes. It takes emotions and turns them into characters. It takes little details and gives them enormous meaning, and then you wake up and the dream dissolves, leaving behind a feeling without a file. That doesn't make the dream worthless, it makes it what it is. In the same way, the big public dream around secret places doesn't have to be true in a literal sense to be meaningful in a human sense. It reveals something about us, that we're curious, that we feel small under the sky, that we're hungry for wonder, and that we don't like empty spaces in our understanding. But tonight we can treat that hunger gently. We can feed it not with answers, but with atmosphere. We can let the mystery exist without grabbing it by the throat. We can let it be a distant mountain under moonlight, beautiful, not urgent. The official secrets can stay official. The human secrets can stay human. And you can stay here, in the calm middle, where your bed is warm, your room is safe, and the mind can gradually stop trying to turn everything into a conclusion. Because you don't need to solve the desert. You don't need to open the folder. You don't need to decode the label. You can simply notice the way the idea of secrecy drifts through culture like a night wind, moving, whispering, then passing on. And as that wind fades, as the mental noise thins, you might find that the most comforting secret of all is this. It's okay to not know. It's okay to let questions remain unanswered tonight. It's okay to let the world be larger than your understanding. Sleep is not a defeat, sleep is trust. So let the mysteries stay at a distance, where they can't poke you with sharp edges. Let them become soft silhouettes. Let them become background. And let your mind do what it was always meant to do at night. Release the need for certainty and drift. Long before the phrase Area 51 became a pop culture spell, before it became a joke, a rumour, a late-night dare, it lived in a world that was already full of invisible tension. The Cold War was like that. A conflict that often didn't look like conflict on the surface. No marching armies across borders every morning. No obvious front lines you could point to on a map and say, there, that's where it is. Instead, it was a different kind of contest. Quiet, constant and oddly abstract. A chess game played at national scale, where the pieces were information, technology, and the ability to see without being seen. And that last part, being seen, was the heartbeat of it. Because in that era, seeing wasn't just eyesight. Seeing meant knowing. Seeing meant predicting. Seeing meant gaining advantage. It meant finding out what the other side was building, how fast it could move, what it could reach, what it could destroy, and what it could defend. To live through that time, even as an ordinary person, was to exist under a ceiling of anxiety you might not name out loud. A quiet awareness that the world's biggest powers were watching each other like hawks in separate cages. That the future depended on which side could innovate faster, hide better, and understand more. So secrecy wasn't a theatrical flourish back then. It was infrastructure. It was paperwork. It was poles and fences and guard posts. It was careful language and closed doors. It was the ordinary machinery of protection in a nervous age. If you imagine the Cold War as a bedtime story setting, it's not all explosions and spy movie glamour. It's more like long hallways with fluorescent lights, filing cabinets, radios, maps, people speaking in coded abbreviations while holding coffee that's gone lukewarm, a constant hum of urgency hidden beneath routine. And in the middle of that, you can begin to sense why a remote place in the desert makes perfect sense. Not as a fantastical lair, but as a practical answer to a practical problem. Because some ideas, especially new technological ideas, are fragile when they're born. An experimental aircraft isn't just a machine. It's a set of secrets shaped into metal and composite. It's a collection of guesses that someone tried to make real. And if your guesses are good, if you found a way to fly higher, faster, farther, or quieter, then protecting those guesses becomes as important as building them. Now imagine the sky in those years. The sky was no longer simply weather and birds and clouds. It was a domain. It was territory in an entirely new sense. It was a place where the boundaries weren't drawn on the ground, but above it, invisible and contested. And the higher you could go, the more you could see, the more you could photograph, the more you could map, the more you could understand. In a world where information was power, altitude was a kind of throne. So you get this quiet technological hunger. Build aircraft that climb beyond ordinary reach, aircraft that can carry cameras and sensors, aircraft that can move like a thought across borders and come back with proof. But building such things isn't like building a normal airplane. It involves unknowns. It involves tests. It involves failures you don't want the world to watch. It involves prototypes that might look bizarre to anyone who sees them because, at first, innovation often looks like mistake. Early versions of advanced designs can appear clumsy, strange, or simply unfamiliar. Unaccustomed shapes, sharp angles, odd silhouettes. Sometimes, from the ground, the human eye tries to match what it sees to a known template. Commercial plane, military jet, something with wings and tail and a familiar posture against the sky. But if it doesn't match, the mind starts reaching. It says, "What is that?" And a Cold War world full of secrecy doesn't answer kindly with a neat label. It answers with silence, or with a denial, or with nothing at all. And the question remains in the air, drifting, collecting other questions like dust. This is one of the most important ingredients in the creation of legends, a real thing that cannot be explained publicly, crossing paths with ordinary people who see fragments of it. Not the whole story, just pieces. A light in the distance, a shape at dusk, a loud roar over mountains, a restricted area sign on a route that used to be open. A friend's father who won't talk about his job. An uncle who says he saw something once and then goes quiet, as if he regrets bringing it up. The Cold War generated thousands of these tiny fragments. It scattered them around like breadcrumbs without providing the loaf. And in that climate, the desert becomes a natural stage for the unseen, because the desert does something simple and effective. It makes it hard to stumble into things by accident. In a city, secrets are vulnerable. Too many eyes, too many cameras, too many buildings and people, too many chances for someone to notice what they shouldn't and tell someone else. In a remote desert valley, there are fewer eyes and fewer accidents. There is distance as protection. There is emptiness as a wall. Even the weather can cooperate. Clear skies, long visibility, low precipitation in many places, conditions that make testing easier and scheduling more predictable. And if you are trying to keep something hidden, predictability is a gift. Not only for the tests themselves, but for controlling who might see what and when. Now, in the popular imagination, we often picture secrecy as dramatic. Men in black suits, briefcases, stern warnings, the sense of being watched by someone who knows everything. But the Cold War kind of secrecy was often duller and therefore more powerful. It was normalized. It was woven into daily institutional life. It didn't require constant theatrics. It required consistency, badges, clearances, need to know. Compartmentalization, where one person knows one piece, another person knows another piece, and the whole picture is kept in separate mental rooms. It's like building a puzzle but giving each worker only a handful of pieces, then telling them not to compare. Not because everyone is evil or paranoid, but because that's how you reduce leaks. That's how you keep a single mistake from unraveling the whole project. So you get this strange situation where the most advanced things on Earth can be built by many people without any one person feeling like they're holding a world-changing secret. They're holding a task, a component, a problem to solve, and they solve it, often without fanfare. From the outside it looks like a myth. From the inside it looks like Tuesday. And that's why the Cold War is such a perfect cradle for a place like Area 51 in our cultural memory. Not because it proves anything extraordinary, but because it created the exact environment where extraordinary-seeming things would be developed in extraordinary quiet. Now imagine, just for a second, what it might have felt like to be a person living in that time, aware of the tension but not privy to the details. You might be reading a newspaper, seeing headlines about diplomacy and threats and tests, while knowing that much of the real contest is happening out of sight. You might know that jets have become faster than imagination. You might hear that rockets can cross oceans. You might sense that technology is moving at a pace your intuition can't keep up with. It can create a ghostly feeling that the world's true shape is being redesigned somewhere behind closed doors, and you'll only hear about it when it's already complete. And when people feel that ghostly distance between public life and hidden development, their minds begin to create bridges, stories that connect the visible world to the invisible one. Area 51 becomes one of those bridges. In a sleepy way, you can think of it as a symbol of the Cold War's invisible architecture, a place where the world's next chapter is being drafted quietly, while the rest of the world goes grocery shopping, goes to school, watches television, tries to sleep. That contrast, ordinary life beside extraordinary secrecy, is both unsettling and oddly comforting. Unsettling because it suggests you're not fully in control. Comforting because it suggests somebody, somewhere, is at least trying to be in control. Now, the Cold War also had its own unique flavour of fear, and fear has a particular relationship with imagination. Fear enlarges shadows. Fear makes gaps in information feel dangerous. Fear makes you think, if I don't know what's happening, it might be the worst thing. When institutions go quiet, fear tends to speak, and when fear speaks, it rarely uses gentle language. It uses bold claims. It uses certainty. It uses dramatic possibilities. But bedtime is not the time for fear to take the microphone. Bedtime is when we can acknowledge fear as an old reflex and then let it sit down. Because in a safe room, with your body resting and your breath slowing, fear becomes less useful. It can be thanked and dismissed like a guard who worked the day shift. So tonight we can hold the Cold War with a softer grip. We can say it was a time of real tension and rapid technological change, a time when secrecy was treated as necessary, a time that naturally produced hidden projects and remote test sites. And in that context, a desert base, whatever its exact details, stops feeling like a supernatural anomaly and starts feeling like a practical choice made by practical people within a nervous era. And that, paradoxically, is what makes the legend more believable as a story. It grows out of human logic, the logic of safety, the logic of advantage, the logic of please don't let the other side know what we're building until we're ready. Now imagine the rhythm of testing. Daytime briefings, nighttime work, flights scheduled to minimize observation, prototype parts moved under covers, technicians checking bolts and panels with the careful patience of people who know that small mistakes can become large disasters. A plane taxiing across a dry lake bed, the sound building, the moment when it lifts, smooth and sudden, as if the earth has released it, the aircraft climbing into thin air, chasing a performance envelope nobody on the ground can truly see. And somewhere miles away, perhaps on a highway or a ridge or a small town porch, a person looks up and sees something odd against the sky. They don't know the context. They don't know the goal. They don't know the name of the program. They only know what their senses report. An unfamiliar silhouette, an unusual flight path, a strange light, a sense of speed or silence that doesn't match expectations. They tell someone. Someone else tells someone else. And because the real explanation is protected by official secrecy, the story never gets neatly folded into the official record of public life. It remains loose. A loose story is like a loose thread. It invites pulling. And when you pull at a loose thread long enough, you can unravel a whole tapestry of myth. That, in a way, is the Cold War's bedtime gift to modern folklore. It created lots of loose threads. Threads of odd sightings, threads of quiet denials, threads of places that don't exist, threads of aircraft that weren't supposed to be possible yet, threads of documents that were classified for decades, then partially revealed, leaving older rumours half confirmed and half mysterious. And once you have half confirmation, the imagination becomes even more confident. It says, see, there are secrets. And then it eagerly extends that truth into larger claims, sometimes too far. But you don't have to follow it too far tonight. Tonight, you can sit with the simplest image, a tense era, a huge desert, and the human need to build new machines in private. You can picture the Cold War like a distant thunderstorm on the horizon, real, serious, but far away in time. You can imagine its energy powering quiet innovations, hidden experiments, and places chosen for their emptiness. And you can let the idea settle. The first alien at a secret test site might not have been a creature at all. This might have been a shape with wings that didn't look like wings, a silhouette your brain couldn't file under any familiar category. A technological object that arrived before the public imagination was ready for it. So the public imagination did what it always does when surprised. It reached for the biggest explanation it could hold, And now, here you are, safe, warm, sleepy, listening to that old surprise echo like a soft sound across decades. The Cold War is over, but the myths it seeded still drift through our culture like dust in moonlight. And that's okay. Myths don't need to be courts of law. Sometimes they're simply the way a society processes the feeling of standing beneath a sky where unseen things travel. So let the air remain where it belongs, back there, in history, with its tension and its hush. And let your body remain where it is, here, in the present, with its blankets and slow breath, and the gentle permission to stop analysing. Because the most important secret tonight is not in a desert base or an old program name. It's the quiet truth your nervous system has been waiting to hear. For now, you can rest. Imagine standing outside at dusk, the hour when the day hasn't fully let go and the night hasn't fully arrived. The world is half-coloured, half-shadowed. The air cools in small steps, and the sky becomes a soft gradient like watercolour drying. In that kind of light, your eyes begin to behave differently. Details blur a little, edges soften. Distances become harder to judge, especially in wide-open country where there aren't many familiar reference points. No tall buildings, no street lights, no lines of windows to tell your brain what far looks like. The sky becomes a stage without markings, and anything that crosses it can feel larger than it is, or closer than it is, or stranger than it is. Now picture a shape moving across that stage, not the usual commercial silhouette with its familiar posture, wings like a calm outstretched shrug, a tail like a small fin, lights in places you expect. Instead, something that doesn't match the templates your mind carries around. A triangle where you expect a cross, a wing that seems too broad, too clean, a body that looks like it's been simplified by someone who hates unnecessary lines, or something so high and thin you can barely make sense of it at all, just a glint that appears, vanishes, appears again. When people see something like that, the first feeling is often not fear. It's a pause, a mental stillness. The mind stops chattering for a moment because it has to allocate resources to the unfamiliar, like a librarian setting down a stamp to focus on a new book that just arrived. And then the questions start. What is that? Is it a plane? Why does it look like that? Why is it so quiet? Why is it so fast? Am I even seeing it right? There's a special kind of mystery created by advanced aircraft because they're built to inhabit the edge of ordinary perception, not in a supernatural way, just in a technical way. They can fly at altitudes people don't intuitively understand. They can move with profiles and sounds that don't match what most of us associate with airplane. They can be deliberately shaped to be difficult to detect in certain ways, or simply shaped for performance that makes them look unfamiliar from below. And an unfamiliar thing in the sky, seen briefly, triggers the oldest part of us. The part that tries to make sense of silhouettes on the savannah. The part that reads meaning into movement. The part that decides quickly whether something belongs in the known world or whether it should be filed under unknown. The sky has always been a place for unknowns. For most of human history it held storms, omens and gods. Today it holds satellites, drones, jets, weather balloons, space debris, and the occasional optical trick. But the emotional effect is similar. We look up, and we feel the distance between what we know and what might exist. Advanced aircraft sit perfectly inside that distance, because when an aircraft is truly new, when it's not yet part of public awareness, it arrives in the world like a rumour made physical. It doesn't come with an explanation attached. It doesn't broadcast its name. It doesn't come with a friendly commercial logo and a flight tracker. It just appears, does what it does, and leaves. And all you're left with is the memory of it, which is a slippery thing. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. It's your brain taking sensory fragments, light, movement, sound, timing, and rebuilding the scene in a way that makes sense. But when something is unfamiliar, The brain has fewer tools. It doesn't know where to put it. So it reaches for comparisons. It borrows shapes from other things. It fills in missing pieces. It edits. This is why two people can look at the same sky and come away with two different stories. One person says, "It was a triangle." Another says, "No, it was round." One remembers it as silent. Another remembers a low humming. One says it moved impossibly fast. Another says it hovered. Not because anyone is lying necessarily, but because human perception is a living system, not a perfect camera. And the night makes that even more true. At night, a single bright light can rewrite the whole scene. Your eye clings to it. Your brain uses it as the anchor point. But a light doesn't tell you distance clearly, especially against a dark background. A small light nearby can look like a big light far away. A slow-moving light can look fast if clouds drift. A fast-moving light can look slow if your head turns. And a blinking pattern, navigation lights, strobes, reflections, can feel like a signal, because the mind loves rhythm and suspects intention. Even the sensation of speed can be a trick. When something passes close by, your brain reads it as fast. When it's very high, it might be travelling quickly, but appear to move slowly because of the scale. Meanwhile, a lower craft moving at a moderate speed can feel startlingly quick because it covers your visual field faster. Then there's sound, another ingredient that creates myths. We tend to assume a plane should be loud, but loudness depends on distance, altitude, wind, terrain, and timing. Sometimes you see an aircraft long before you hear it, especially if it's high. Sometimes you hear it after it has already passed, like thunder following lightning. Sometimes the sound bounces off mountains and arrives from the wrong direction, making it feel like the craft is somewhere it isn't. And sometimes, truly, there is very little sound at all, because certain designs and flight conditions simply don't deliver the noise to where you stand. That can feel uncanny. Humans expect cause and effect to match up neatly. See it, hear it, understand it. When those things don't align, we interpret it as impossible, when it may only be unfamiliar. Now add secrecy to the mix. If an aircraft is part of a program that isn't public, there is no official explanation ready for your question, no press release, no helpful article, no, "Oh yes, that's the new model, it's been tested, here are the specs." Instead, there's silence. And silence is not neutral in the human mind, it's provocative. Silence makes space, and space invites stories. So a person sees a strange aircraft. They talk about it. The story moves from one person to another, like a candle flame passed along. Each time it's retold, it becomes slightly smoother, slightly more certain, slightly more dramatic. Not maliciously, just naturally. That's how storytelling works. We add clarity where memory is foggy. We add significance where a moment felt emotionally charged. And if the story meets a hungry audience, an audience that already suspects that hidden projects exist, that already believes there are secrets behind fences and mountains, then the story finds a home. It becomes part of the mythology. This is why advanced aircraft can look like myths to the public. Not because they're magical, but because they show up before the culture has a slot for them. They arrive early, like a word from the future, and the present doesn't know how to translate it. If you want a gentle example to hold in your mind, think of how people react the first time they see a technology they didn't expect. The first time someone saw a moving picture on a screen, the first time someone heard a voice through a telephone, the first time someone watched a drone hover. Surprise doesn't always produce correct explanations. It produces emotional explanations first. The feeling comes first. The label comes second. And the bigger the surprise, the bigger the label the mind tends to reach for. Now imagine this happening not with a small novelty, but with something streaking across the sky. Something with a shape you can't file away. Something you weren't prepared for. It's no wonder the mind grabs at the most dramatic category available. UFO, alien, not from here. Those are not just claims, they are containers. They are ways to hold a sensation that otherwise has nowhere to go. And once that container exists, it fills up quickly, because more people have more sightings, more stories, more fragments. A strange contrail at high altitude with the sun catching it long after sunset on the ground. A bright star that moves oddly, which might be a satellite or an aircraft aligned with your line of sight in a peculiar way. A sudden boom that rattles windows but comes from a clear sky. A string of lights that looks like something coordinated, which might be aircraft in formation or separate objects seen with distorted perspective. The sky provides endless material for the imagination, and advanced technology adds even more. But here's the soft, sleepy pivot that makes this comforting rather than unsettling. Even when you don't know what something is, you can still let it be a normal part of living in a big world. Not everything unknown is dangerous. Most unknowns are simply unknown. A question mark in the sky. A moment your brain can't immediately translate. You don't have to turn it into a threat. You don't have to turn it into a revelation. You can let it be what it is. A brief encounter with the limits of your information. That, in itself, is a peaceful thought. Because it means you don't have to solve anything tonight. You can simply drift through the atmosphere of it. The idea that somewhere, at some point, people built machines that pushed the boundaries of what the public expected. That those machines were tested quietly, far from cities. That sometimes ordinary people caught glimpses. That glimpses became stories. And that the stories, whether they grew exaggerated or not, were born from a very human place. Wonder mixed with uncertainty. If you've ever seen something in the distance at night and felt your mind start to race, you know the sensation. Your brain begins drafting explanations like a writer trying to finish a story before the ink dries. It says, could it be this, or that, or something else? That racing is energy. That's your alert system. It's trying to protect you by making the unknown intelligible. But at bedtime, we can let that system rest. We can say softly, thank you, not needed right now. And then the image changes. Instead of a mystery that demands answers, the aircraft becomes a quiet symbol of human ingenuity. Humans reaching, humans building, humans testing, humans trying to shape air into a place where machines can live. Because regardless of the rumours that gather afterward, the reality of making something fly is already extraordinary. It is already a kind of miracle in the humble sense, an achievement so complex that it becomes normal only because we've gotten used to it. A wing is a trick on gravity. A runway is a promise made to the sky. A takeoff is a moment where the Earth lets go. And whether the aircraft is a familiar passenger plane or a secret prototype with an unfamiliar silhouette, it still participates in that same quiet wonder. So imagine one of those nights again. You're standing under the sky, the air is cool, the desert or the countryside or the outskirts of town is quiet. The stars are beginning to show. A shape moves across the darkness. It's there, and then it isn't. For a moment your mind tries to grab it, to hold it, to label it, to pin it down like a butterfly in a glass case. But then gently, you let your mind open its hand. You let the shape move on without dragging you with it. You let the sky keep its distance, and you return to the pleasant, simple facts of your own room, your own body, your own breath, the steady support beneath you. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. Let the idea of strange aircraft become just another distant thing in the world, like a train you hear faintly at night, like a ship's horn far out on the water, like thunder on the horizon, real but not yours to manage. And as your thoughts soften, you might notice something almost funny and sweet about the whole phenomenon. The same human mind that invents myths is also the mind that falls asleep every night into a private theatre of images that make even less sense and feel even more real. We're all, in a way, living alongside mysteries all the time. We don't understand every cell in our body. We don't understand every flicker of thought. We don't fully understand consciousness or dreams, or why a memory can make your chest ache. And yet you live anyway. You breathe anyway. You rest anyway. So it's okay if the sky contains shapes you can't name. It's okay if somewhere, far away, machines exist that you've never seen clearly. It's okay if your imagination wants to decorate those machines with story, because imagination is what it does. It paints, it plays, it tries. But now you can let the painting fade into the background. You can let the story drift like a cloud. And you can let your mind become simple again, like a dry lake bed under moonlight. Flat, quiet, ready for sleep. There's something deeply strange about a fence in the middle of nowhere. In a city, fences are everywhere, around playgrounds, gardens, construction sites, apartment courtyards. You walk past them without thinking. They blend into the background like streetlights and sidewalks. They feel ordinary because everything around them is busy, and your mind is already occupied with 100 small decisions. But out in open desert, where the land is wide, quiet, and almost empty, a fence becomes a statement. It feels less like a simple barrier and more like an announcement that someone somewhere drew a line across the world and said, here, not here, this side, that side. And the openness of the landscape makes that line feel louder than it should. A fence in the desert doesn't hide behind anything. It can't pretend to be decorative. It doesn't disguise itself as landscaping or property boundaries. It sits there plainly, often stretching toward the horizon, as if it wants you to understand the scale of its intention. A thin, human-made string of metal cutting across ancient land. One of the quietest ways we tell nature, we're organizing this. Even if you've never seen such a fence in person, your mind knows the shape of it from stories. Chain link shimmering in heat, barbed wire catching sun like tiny teeth. Posts planted at regular intervals like punctuation in a sentence that goes on for miles. Sometimes a second fence behind the first, and sometimes a road that runs alongside it like a patrol line. And then there are the signs. Warning signs are fascinating because they're made of words, and words can be more intimidating than walls. A wall just exists. A sign speaks. It addresses you. It assumes you have intention. It makes your presence feel noticed even if no one is visible. It turns empty land into a conversation. The wording is usually sharp and spare, as if the sign itself is too busy to be polite. Restricted, no trespassing. Authorized personnel only. Use of deadly force authorized. It's the language of boundaries, and it's designed to do something very specific to your nervous system. Make you stop. Not with violence, ideally, with suggestion, with certainty, with a kind of official coldness that says, this is not a place for curiosity, but of course, for humans, nothing feeds curiosity like being told not to have it. That's not a moral failure, it's just how our minds respond to forbidden doors. The moment a door becomes locked, it becomes interesting. The moment a line appears, we want to know what's on the other side. Not always because we want to take it, but because our imagination hates blank spaces. A fence creates a blank space by definition. It blocks your access. It blocks your confirmation. It blocks your ability to walk over and see with your own eyes. And because it blocks confirmation, it invites speculation. Your mind starts decorating the unknown like it's hanging pictures in an empty room. Even an ordinary thing behind a fence can feel extraordinary, simply because you can't check. A warehouse becomes a vault. A runway becomes a portal. A maintenance building becomes a laboratory. A quiet road becomes a corridor of secrets. And the desert itself assists these thoughts, because the desert has so few distractions. When there's not much else to look at, your attention sticks to the one thing that breaks the pattern. A fence line in emptiness is like a single note played in a silent room. It rings. The fence also changes your sense of space. On one side, you stand in the normal world, where roads belong to everyone, and land feels public and open and indifferent to your presence. On the other side, you imagine a world with rules and watchers and procedures, a world where someone might know exactly where you are at that moment, even if you can't see them. And that feeling, being seen without seeing back, is one of the oldest ingredients in human unease. But here's the soothing truth, and it's important. Your nervous system can react to a boundary without implying there's anything supernatural or terrifying behind it. Your body doesn't need evidence to tighten at the word restricted. That tightening is just instinct. It's your inner guard dog lifting its head, saying, "This matters. Be careful." That instinct is trying to protect you. It's doing its job, and you can thank it quietly for being alert. Then, since you're here in bed, safe, you can let it relax again. Because the fence in our story is not a challenge. It's not a dare. It's part of the atmosphere. We aren't crossing lines tonight. We don't need to prove anything. We're simply walking along the edge in our imagination, like someone strolling beside the shoreline without stepping into the water. There's something almost poetic about the way boundaries work in remote places. The land is so old, so vast, so patient. Mountains that have been sitting in sunlight for millions of summers. Yet a thin line of metal can declare a change in reality, at least socially. The ground doesn't change, the rocks don't change, but the meaning changes instantly. Meaning is a human material. We manufacture it everywhere we go. In the desert, that manufactured meaning becomes visible. You might picture the fence at different times of day. In harsh noon light, it would look crisp, almost clinical. Metal shining, shadows sharp on the dust. Heat might shimmer above it, making the posts wobble in the air as if reality itself is slightly unstable. The sign's letters would almost vibrate from brightness, hard to look at for long. At dusk, the fence would soften. The metal would lose its glare. The posts would become silhouettes. The warning sign would become less readable at a distance, turning from text into shape. The whole thing would look less like an instruction and more like a symbol, an emblem of separation. And at night, the fence might almost disappear, except where it catches moonlight or reflects a lambent glow from some far-off lamp. The sign might be visible only as a rectangle of paler darkness. The boundary would become mostly psychological. You know it's there, even if you can't see it well. There's a quiet power in that. How much of a boundary is made from belief? We choose to accept certain lines as real, and because we accept them, they become real in practice. Borders, property lines, restricted zones. These are agreements written on the invisible paper. The fences and signs are simply reminders that the agreement exists. In the case of a secretive base, the agreement is reinforced with special seriousness. That seriousness is part of its effectiveness. It doesn't just say, "Please don't," it says you truly shouldn't. And again, in the mind of someone outside looking in, the seriousness can be interpreted as a clue. If it's guarded so intensely, it must be enormous. Sometimes that's true. Sensitive work, expensive technology, national security concerns. Sometimes the guard is simply guard, the kind of standard precaution that gets copied from one place to another because it's policy. But the imagination doesn't love policy, it loves drama. So it reads a fence and hears a whisper. Something is happening here. And then the mind begins to paint. It paints cameras on poles, even if you don't see them. It paints vehicles moving slowly on patrol roads. It paints floodlights turning the desert into a pale stage. It paints people sitting in quiet rooms watching screens. Some of this might be true in a practical sense. Much of it might be exaggerated by the mind because the mind is not satisfied by maybe. The mind wants yes or no, and when it can't have yes, It often inflates maybe until it feels like yes. But bedtime is a wonderful time to loosen that grip. At bedtime, you can let the fence return to what it actually is in your imagination. A line, a prop, a boundary that adds shape to the story. And you can do something else too. You can notice how fences resemble other boundaries in your own life. Not in a heavy way, just gently. There are boundaries between work and rest, between online noise and private quiet, between what you share and what you keep, between what you can control and what you can't. And sleep is one of the kindest boundaries of all. Sleep is the fence line around your mind telling the world, not tonight, not right now, I'm going somewhere inward. So when you picture that desert fence, you don't have to picture it as a threat. You can picture it as the world's way of saying, this is contained. The unknown is held at a distance. It's not spilling into your room. It's not crawling under your door. It's simply somewhere else, far away, behind hills and miles and policies. And because it's far away, it can become soft, like a distant train horn in the night, like thunder that stays on the horizon. If your mind wants to linger on the warning signs, you can let them fade into abstraction. Just shapes in the dark, rectangles that don't need to be read. The letters can blur. The meaning can blur. You don't have to engage with it as an instruction. You can treat it like set dressing, part of the mood, and then, instead of the fence being the centre of attention, you can let the desert become the centre again. The wide patient land, the big sky, the quiet, the way darkness smooths the sharp edges of everything. You can imagine yourself walking parallel to that fence line, not as a trespasser, not as a rebel, but as a calm observer in a story. You're not trying to get in. You're simply acknowledging that the world contains places you don't go. That reality has rooms not meant for you, and that this is normal. It can even be comforting, because if the world has rooms you don't enter, then you don't have to carry the responsibility of them. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to solve everything. You don't have to open every door just because it exists. Some doors remain closed and the world continues, and you can continue too, towards sleep, towards softness, away from the fence line and its sharp language, and back to the gentle truth of being inside your own safe boundary, your bed, your room, your breath. Inhale. Slow. Exhale. Slower. Let the fence become a thin line in the distance, then a thread, then nothing at all swallowed up by the night. Let the warning signs become pale rectangles, then shadows, then just part of the landscape's memory. And let your mind do the simplest, kindest thing it can do at bedtime. Stop reaching for the other side. There's a particular sensation that settles over you when you start thinking about hidden files, especially the kind people imagine tucked away in government offices, military archives, or locked cabinets behind doors that don't have friendly signs. It isn't exactly fear. Not at first. It's more like the feeling you get when you're walking through a quiet building late in the evening, when the lights are dimmer than usual and your footsteps sound too loud. The building might be perfectly harmless, but the emptiness gives everything a little extra meaning. A closed door becomes more interesting. A hallway feels longer. An elevator button feels like it's waiting for a secret thumbprint. Hidden files carry that same mood. They suggest that somewhere in the world there are ordinary-looking rooms filled with extraordinarily careful silence. Places where paper becomes power simply because it's organized and withheld. Places where information, plain words on plain pages, turns into a kind of gravity. Because a hidden file doesn't have to contain anything dramatic to feel dramatic. It just has to be hidden. The moment something is placed out of reach, it gains a glow, a soft halo of significance. The mind begins to assume that if it's guarded, it must matter. If it matters, it must be valuable. If it's valuable, then maybe it's world-changing. And if it's world-changing, then you begin to look back at your everyday life and wonder, in a quiet, dizzy way, how much of the world's real story happens without you ever hearing about it. That's the hidden files feeling. Not a claim, not a conclusion, just a mental weather pattern that drifts in when secrecy and curiosity overlap. Now imagine an office. Not a cinematic office with polished floors and dramatic shadows, just an ordinary building humming with air conditioning, fluorescent lights, beige walls, carpet that's seen 1,000 footsteps, a place that smells faintly of paper and toner and the tired coffee that's been warming too long on a hot plate. In that building there's a set of drawers, metal drawers, heavy ones, the kind that slide out with a short, stubborn sound. Each drawer has labels, dates, project codes, names you don't recognize. Most of the folders inside would be deeply boring. Forms, approvals, travel schedules, maintenance notes, reports that say attached and then include attachments that read like algebra. But your mind doesn't picture the boring folders. It pictures the one folder, always the one folder, that feels like it has weight, the one that has a thicker tab, the one that's stamped in bold letters, the one that someone touches and then hesitates, as if the paper itself is hot. And the strange thing is, whether such a folder exists or not, the feeling still works on you. The feeling isn't dependent on the facts. It's dependent on the idea that knowledge is being contained in a physical place, kept from you on purpose. In the human psyche, being kept out of information can feel like being kept out of reality. And that's why hidden files loom so large in stories. They represent the possibility that the world has layers you aren't invited to see. But bedtime is a gentle place to hold this. Because at bedtime, you can acknowledge that the world does have layers, many of them, and you can also acknowledge something else. You're not required to peel them all back tonight. You can let your curiosity exist without letting it tense you. You can let the image of hidden files become a peaceful one, not a threat, but a quiet library, not a trap, but an archive, not a conspiracy, but the ordinary human habit of storing information. In a way, your own mind is full of hidden files, memories you don't revisit often, old conversations tucked away, moments you thought you forgot, still quietly filed somewhere behind the scenes. Information you don't access until something, smell, music, a phrase, pulls the drawer open. The mind is an archive too, and sometimes when you're drifting towards sleep, the archive begins to hum softly. Not with urgency, but with the gentle sense that there are rooms in you that you don't need to enter right now. Now, in stories about secrecy, the most iconic image isn't the locked drawer. It's what happens when the drawer is finally opened and you discover the pages inside aren't fully visible. The black bars, the redactions, the clean rectangular shadows placed over sentences like strips of night laid across a bright day. There's something so visually sharp about a redacted document. Even if you don't read the words, you feel the intent. You feel the boundary. You feel the hand that decided this part is for you, and this part is not. A redacted page performs secrecy in front of your eyes. It doesn't merely hide, it demonstrates hiding. It makes absence visible. And the mind reacts strongly to that, because the mind hates missing pieces. It's like hearing a song where the chorus cuts out every time it reaches the most important line. The brain leans forward. It tries to reconstruct. It tries to guess. It becomes a little haunted by what it can't have. If you've ever tried to read a sentence with key words removed, you know how quickly your brain begins to supply replacements. It doesn't sit there politely. It lunges toward completion. It says, surely the missing word is this. Surely the missing phrase means that. But redactions do something subtler too. They create a particular kind of intimacy, not the warm kind, the tense kind. It feels like you're being shown a document that is not meant for you, like someone has slid you a folder under a table but kept a few fingers on it, ready to tug it back. Even if the content underneath is mundane, the act of redacting makes it feel like the hidden part must be the heart of the matter. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's names, methods, locations, specific technical details. Sometimes it's a simple legal caution. Sometimes it's information that could put someone at risk or reveal a capability. Sometimes it's just that someone followed standard procedure, and standard procedure is to cover certain things. But your mind doesn't care about procedure. Your mind cares about narrative. Your mind looks at a black bar and thinks, that's where the truth is hiding. And then it can't help but imagine what the truth might be. It's almost like the black bar becomes a little doorway to your imagination. A doorway you step through without realizing it. One moment you're looking at paper, and the next moment you're picturing underground corridors, strange craft, whispered conversations, and the dramatic reveal that turns the world inside out. This is why redactions are so powerful in secret place stories. They aren't proof of extraordinary claims by themselves. They're proof of withholding, and withholding is the fuel that keeps speculation burning. But tonight you can let that fire burn low. You can let it become coals, warm, dim, harmless. Because there's another way to experience a redacted document when you're sleepy. Not as a provocation, but as a soothing pattern. Black rectangles like calm blocks of shadow. The page like a snowy field with fences across it. A simple reminder that there are always parts of things you don't see, and that not seeing is not the same as danger. Your room is full of unseen things right now. The inside of your walls, the wiring under the floor, the distant rooms in the building or street you're not occupying, the lives other people are living beyond your window. You don't fear those unseen things. You simply accept them as part of a big world. So you can accept the black bars the same way, as evidence of the world's size, not as a demand to solve it. And then, like so many stories do, the redacted page leads into the next image, the idea of leaks. Leaks are a different kind of secret. A leak is not a neatly presented official release. It doesn't arrive with a calm introduction and footnotes and context. A leak is messy, fragmented, incomplete. It arrives like a torn corner of a map, the part that shows coastline but not the rest of the continent. And that's why leaks create a particular kind of emotional pull. They make you feel like you're close to the forbidden, close to the hidden, close to the edge of something real. A leak suggests that the system isn't perfect, that the vault isn't sealed, that the curtain has a gap, that someone somewhere decided to let a sliver of information slip out into the world, intentionally or by accident. In the imagination, leaks are dramatic. A person in a dim room copying files to a drive, slipping papers into a coat, glancing over their shoulder. A phone call with a distorted voice, an envelope left in the wrong mailbox. A photograph taken quickly, blurry, trembling like proof snatched from a dream. In reality, leaks, when they're real, can be far less cinematic. They can be someone talking too openly, a document misfiled, a screenshot shared, a report sent to the wrong place, a detail mentioned at a conference, a rumour that begins where a fact ended and then grows legs. But the emotional effect stays the same. A leak feels like a crack in the wall, and once a crack exists, people start listening for what might be on the other side. The trouble with leaks is that they carry a strange mixture of intimacy and uncertainty. They feel personal, like you're being trusted with something, yet they are often missing the very pieces that would help you interpret them properly. A page without explanation can be misleading. A quote without context can bend in the wrong direction. A photograph without metadata can be anything from groundbreaking to misunderstood to fabricated. And yet, that uncertainty is part of the attraction, because uncertainty doesn't end the story. It extends it. It invites you to become a participant, an interpreter, a decoder, a collector of patterns. You begin to stitch the fragments together. You begin to build a mental collage, and the picture you build is influenced not only by the fragments, but by your mood, your fears, your hopes, your appetite for wonder. That's why different people can look at the same leak and feel totally different things. One person feels vindicated. See? They've been hiding it. Another feels skeptical. This doesn't prove anything. Another feels thrilled. What if it's true? Another feels tired. I don't want to chase this. All of those reactions are human. All of them make sense. But at bedtime, you get to choose the reaction that helps you rest. And the restful reaction is this. A leak is a fragment. A fragment is not a whole. And your nervous system does not need to treat fragments like emergencies. You can let them float by like leaves on dark water. In your mind's eye, imagine a slow-moving stream in moonlight, not rushing, not churning, just gliding. Now and then, a piece of paper drifts past, an image, a phrase, a rumour, a half-readable memo. You notice it. You don't grab it. You let it go downstream. Because sleep is not served by collecting evidence. Sleep is served by releasing the need to resolve. The world can keep its locked drawers tonight. The black bars can remain black. The cracked wall can stay unexamined. The fragments can remain fragments. Your only job right now is to soften, to let your breath slow down, to let the part of your brain that wants to solve and connect and conclude rest its tools on the table and step away. And if any of these images, files, redactions, leaks, still spark a little tension in you, you can do something simple and kind. Shrink them. Shrink the office into a small building far away. Shrink the filing cabinet into a single drawer. Shrink the drawer into a folder. Shrink the folder into a page. Shrink the page into a few black rectangles. Shrink the rectangles into harmless shadows. And then let the shadows fade into the dark comfort of your closed eyes. Because the biggest secret of all, bigger than any hidden document, is that your mind doesn't need to know everything to be safe. It only needs to know this. Right now, you are here. Right now, you are supported. Right now, you can let the mystery stay out in the desert, while you drift somewhere quiet and warm, where nothing needs to be decoded at all. Some stories don't just get told once and then politely fade away. Some stories sink into the culture like a dye, colouring everything they touch, even decades later. They become less like a single event and more like a shadow cast by an object you can't quite see. Roswell is like that. Even if you stripped it of every rumour and argument and late-night certainty, the name still carries a particular weight. It has become a kind of cultural shorthand for the moment the ordinary world allegedly brushed up against something it wasn't prepared to understand. Not a conclusion. More like a symbol pinned to a corkboard in the collective imagination. And symbols are powerful, because symbols don't need to be proven in the way a courtroom requires. Symbols operate in a different part of the human mind. They operate the way dreams do, by association, by mood, by the way a single image can awaken a whole library of feelings. So when people talk about secret bases, the Roswell story often shows up like a familiar ghost, hovering at the edge of the discussion. It's the story people reference with a certain tone, sometimes playful, sometimes intense, sometimes conspiratorial, sometimes skeptical, sometimes all of those in the same breath. Whether someone treats it as myth or mystery, it still functions as a doorway. And once Roswell becomes a doorway, the imagination does what it always does. It walks through. It starts connecting places that don't have to be connected. It treats distance like a detail. It treats decades like a short hallway. It turns separate chapters of history into a single continuous narrative because the brain loves continuity. It loves the feeling that the world is a story with a thread you can follow, beginning to middle to end, rather than a messy pile of isolated facts. This is why Roswell becomes the shadow on the wall behind other secret place legends, not because it proves anything about them, but because it provides a ready-made shape. Something happened, it was confusing, it was hidden, and the official story didn't satisfy everyone. That shape is reusable, it's portable, it fits into new contexts like a key that almost fits a lock. And the more the shape is repeated in media, books, films, documentaries, interviews, internet threads, the more it starts to feel like a fixed landmark in the mental landscape. Like a mountain you've never visited but could still recognize in silhouette. At bedtime, though, we can hold Roswell in the gentlest way, as a cultural bedtime story ingredient, a piece of folklore that has grown, swollen, and changed over time the way all folklore does. Not as a demand that you decide what you believe, but as an example of how humans treat the unknown when it leaves fingerprints on public attention. Because here's the quiet truth. The unknown is uncomfortable, and humans are natural comfort makers. When the mind encounters a blank space, an unanswered question, an inconsistency, we cannot comment. It doesn't simply sit with the blankness like an empty bowl. It reaches for ingredients. It tries to cook something satisfying. It wants a meal, not a menu. This is where the next layer begins, the human need to fill empty space. You can see it everywhere, not just in big mysteries. In conversations, if someone pauses too long, we rush to interpret what the pause means. In text messages, if someone doesn't reply, we begin writing entire novels about why. In relationships, in work, in life, silence gets filled. We don't like gaps. Gaps feel like vulnerability. So we patch them with meaning, and the mind is extremely skilled at this patchwork. It will take a few scraps of cloth, an anecdote, a photo, a rumour, a word like classified, and stitch together a blanket. The blanket may not be accurate, but it is warm. It offers coherence where coherence is missing. That warmth is seductive, because daily life can feel coldly random sometimes. You do your best, you plan, and then the world happens anyway. People change, programs fail, luck intervenes. The universe doesn't always feel like it's telling a story you can follow, so when a mystery appears, especially one wrapped in official secrecy, the mind senses an opportunity. Maybe here is a hidden thread, maybe here is a plot, maybe here is a reason things are the way they are. It isn't only curiosity, it's also longing, a longing for the world to be legible. And that longing is deeply human. It's so human that it shows up in our oldest myths. Hidden realms, forbidden knowledge, initiations, sacred chambers, underworld journeys. Across cultures, humans have always imagined that behind the visible world there is another world, and that access to it is restricted. In modern times, one of the ways that ancient template shows up is through the language of secrecy. Classified programs, restricted sites, redacted documents, locked facilities. The setting changes, but the underlying psychological shape stays familiar. And once you recognize that shape, you can relate to it more softly. You can see the mind's storytelling impulse as a natural function, like dreaming itself. Because what is a dream, really, if not a story your mind tells to fill the night? In dreams, the brain takes fragments, faces, feelings, symbols, scraps of memory, and weaves them into scenes that feel meaningful even when they're strange. Dreams don't like emptiness either. They fill it with imagery. They fill it with narrative. They turn vague emotion into specific characters. They take the abstract and make it concrete. And in a cultural sense, mysteries like Roswell and places like Area 51 can function the same way. They become dream material for an awake society. Now, once the mind begins filling gaps, it tends to go in a particular direction, downward, not always, but often. Because the underground is the mind's favourite hiding place. Think about it. When we imagine secrecy, we don't often imagine it in an open meadow at noon. We imagine it under floors, behind walls, beneath mountains, We imagine elevators and tunnels and hidden doors that click open if you know the code. Why? Because underground feels instinctively private. It feels insulated from the sky, from neighbours, from chance sightings. It feels protected, not merely by guards, but by geology. The Earth itself becomes a shield. And beyond practicality, underground also carries symbolic weight. The underground is where the unconscious lives in metaphor. It's the below, where we store what we don't want to look at directly. Fears, forgotten memories, uncomfortable truths, old grief. It's the basement of the psyche. So when people imagine the secrets of a place like Area 51, the imagination often builds downward first. It says, surely the real thing isn't on the surface. Surely what matters is underneath. Then the picture forms, a base above ground that looks almost ordinary, runways, hangars, support buildings, and beneath it, levels. Level 1, security checkpoints, cold hallways, fluorescent light. Level 2, labs, storage, rooms that hum with equipment. Level 3, the real level, the level with the locked doors, the rooms without windows, the objects covered in tarps. Level 4, deeper still, where the myth becomes fully mythic. You can feel how this kind of structure satisfies the mind. It gives the mystery architecture. It turns speculation into a map. It makes the unknown navigable. And one of the most elegant symbols within that underground architecture is the elevator. Elevator dreams are incredibly common because elevators are natural metaphors. In waking life, an elevator is a controlled descent or ascent. It moves you between levels without you having to walk the stairs. You step inside a box, the doors close, you surrender control for a moment, and when the doors open, you're in a different world. That's exactly what falling asleep feels like. You step into your bed, your eyes close, your body surrenders, your mind drifts, and then doors open, and you're in dream space where the laws are different. So when the imagination pictures an elevator descending into underground levels, it's not only building a secret base, it's also reenacting the nightly ritual of entering the hidden parts of the mind. And for bedtime, that's perfect, because you don't have to treat the underground imagery as something threatening. You can treat it as soothing symbolic movement, downward, slower, quieter, deeper. You can imagine the elevator in a calmer way than the movies do. The elevator doors are not slammed shut by urgent guards. They close softly, like eyelids. The lighting inside is dim and warm instead of harsh and suspicious. The hum is gentle, like a distant fan. The descent isn't a plunge, it's a slow glide, like sinking into a hot bath. And as the elevator descends, the surface world becomes less important. The noise of headlines, arguments and uncertainty fades away. The mind stops trying to solve, stops trying to prove, stops trying to win. It just travels down and down and down to a level where everything is quiet enough to hear your own breathing. That's the real purpose of the underground imagery in a bedtime story. Not to scare you with hidden labs, but to guide you into depth. Depth as calm. Depth as release, depth as the place where thoughts soften. And the funny thing is, when you let it work that way, you start to see how these three elements, Roswell's shadow, the mind's gap filling and the underground myth, are all part of the same human pattern. We encounter an unanswered question, we feel the discomfort of not knowing. We create a story to give the discomfort shape. The story tends to go behind doors and under floors, because that's where our minds naturally place what is hidden. And then the story becomes a shared landscape where people can wander together, trading maps, trading rumours, trading interpretations. But tonight, you don't need the map. Tonight, you don't need the rumours. Tonight, you don't need to solve the shadow on the wall. You can let the whole cultural mythos do what myths do best, exist at a distance, providing atmosphere without requiring action. If your mind wants to play with the imagery, let it play softly. like turning down the volume on a radio until the voices become indistinct and comforting. If your mind wants to picture the desert at night, picture it as calm and open. If it wants to picture underground levels, picture them as quiet and warm and slow. If it wants to linger on what if, let what if become a lullaby phrase, not a question with teeth. And then gently you can return to the one level that matters right now. The level you're on. The simple, safe surface of your bed. The steady support beneath your body. The quiet rise and fall of your breath. Inhale. Slow. Exhale. Slower. The shadow stories can remain shadows. The gap can remain unfilled. The elevator can keep descending in the background of your imagination, not toward danger, but towards sleep. Toward that deep, private place where the mind stops trying to turn everything into certainty and simply rests. Picture a hangar at night. Not the bright, busy kind you might see at a commercial airport, but something more remote and self-contained. The desert air has cooled enough to feel clean and thin, and the sky above is crowded with stars that look sharper than they do anywhere near city lights. The ground is still holding a little of the day's warmth, like a slow ember, but the wind, if it moves at all, moves carefully, as if it doesn't want to disturb the quiet. The hangar sits there with a kind of calm bulk, as if it has been placed rather than built. From a distance it can look surprisingly simple, a large geometric shell, a rectangle against darkness. No grand architecture, no decorative features, no attempt to impress, just function, just scale. And it's the scale that catches you. Hangar doors always look too big for the human body. They are built for machines that already feel enormous, and the doors still end up enormous in comparison. At night, the door becomes a single dark plane, like a cliff face made of metal. If there's moonlight, it might lay across the surface in a pale wash, revealing seams and riveted lines and patches of texture where the paint has weathered. If there are lights nearby, they might make a small pool on the ground that doesn't quite reach the doorway, leaving the centre of the door in a gentle, stubborn darkness. That darkness invites the mind to do what minds do. Imagine depth. A hangar door isn't just a door to the imagination. It's a promise that there is space behind space, that there is a room big enough to swallow the usual rules of scale, big enough to hold something that isn't meant to sit out in the open. Even if what's inside is perfectly ordinary, tools, scaffolding, maintenance equipment, the door still feels like an object that belongs to stories, because doors are threshold symbols. Once you place a door into a narrative, you create two states, before and after, outside and inside, known and unknown. At night, those differences feel stronger. Imagine the ground in front of the hangar. It's flat, hard-packed, a surface made for wheels and heavy loads. In some places it might be smoother, in others slightly rougher, with fine dust gathered along edges. Maybe there are faint tyre marks. Maybe there's a line painted on the concrete, faded and practical. The air smells like nothing much. The desert doesn't offer many scents at night, though you might catch a hint of metal or oil or the cool mineral scent of old ground. Everything feels paused, not abandoned exactly, just paused, like a stage between acts. The most curious part is not the door itself, but the way your mind changes around it. Standing near something so closed and so large can make you feel small in a quiet way. Smaller, yes, but also calmer, as if the world is reminding you that not everything is meant to be held in your hands. Some things are big, some things are distant, some things are simply not for you to open. And that realization doesn't have to feel frustrating, it can feel soothing. Because the impulse to know, while beautiful, is also exhausting. The mind can spend entire days trying to pry truth out of the world like a stubborn lid. But at bedtime, it's okay to let the door remain a door. It's okay to let the interior remain interior. You can stand outside and simply notice the shape of mystery without trying to break it. If you like, let your imagination approach the door slowly, the way you might walk toward the ocean at night. The closer you get, the more the surface details seem to shift. The metal looks less like a flat wall and more like a skin-covering structure. You notice the edges where the door meets the frame. You noticed a slight gap at the bottom where darkness pools like spilled ink. You notice how sound behaves differently here. Your own breathing feels louder, your clothing shifting sounds more present, while the wider world stays quiet. And then, without anything dramatic happening, you can let the door become a gentle symbol of the boundary between waking curiosity and sleep. Because you have your own hangar door each night. It's the moment you stop trying to figure it out, whatever it is, and allow yourself to close the workshop of thought, to put down the tools, to stop checking and measuring, stop imagining outcomes, stop running scenarios. The mind, like a busy facility, doesn't need to operate at full brightness all the time. Sometimes it needs to dim the lights, close the doors, and let everything inside settle into stillness. So in this story, the hangar door can close, not with a slam, not with urgency, but with a soft inevitability, like the world turning its face away from activity and toward rest, like night itself, arriving without asking permission. And once the door is closed, the imagination tends to wander to what people most love to place behind it. Alien secrets. It's such a dramatic phrase, and yet it often shows up with an oddly childlike sense of wonder. Even skeptical people can feel the pull of it, not because they're convinced, but because the idea touches something deep. It touches the ancient human habit of looking at the sky and asking quietly, "Is anyone else there?" That question is older than radio towers and airplanes and classified documents. It's older than modern nations. People have been asking it since the first night someone looked up and realized the stars were not holes in a ceiling, but distant fires. In many eras, the unknown in the sky was interpreted through the language available at the time. Gods, spirits, chariots, omens. In our era, our most powerful language is technological. We live in a world where machines do things that would have looked like sorcery to people a few centuries ago. We carry pocket-sized devices that talk across oceans. We launch objects into orbit. We photograph distant planets. We build vehicles that can climb into thin air and return. So when the modern imagination tries to dress mystery in a costume, it often chooses a technological costume. It imagines craft. It imagines visitors. It imagines hidden materials. Alien Secrets is not just a claim. It's a modern myth, a way of translating the feeling of awe into something that fits the age. And myths serve a purpose beyond truth claims. Myths help humans hold feelings that are too big to hold directly. Awe is one of those feelings. So is smallness. So is the ache of not knowing. So is the longing for meaning. The idea of Alien Secrets wraps all of that into a single tempting package. Maybe the world is larger than you thought. Maybe your daily worries are tiny compared to the true scale of reality. Maybe something astonishing has happened behind closed doors. Even if you don't believe any of it literally, you can still understand why people love the story. It offers a sense of perspective. It helps the mind lift its head above the repetitive problems of life and imagine a wider horizon. And for bedtime, perspective is calming. Because perspective loosens the grip of the day. It makes your tasks feel less urgent, your anxieties less fatal. Not because your life doesn't matter, but because the universe is big enough to hold your life without you needing to strain every second. So you can let the Alien Secrets idea function as a lullaby of scale. A reminder that the night sky is still mysterious no matter how many satellites we launch. A reminder that there are still questions science is working on. Still distances we can't truly grasp emotionally. Still corners of reality that feel like dark rooms we've only just begun to enter. Now, if your mind tries to turn that wonder into fear, if it whispers, what if it's dangerous? What if it means we're not safe? You can soothe it with a simple truth. Most of the sky is just sky. Most of the unknown is just unknown. And you, right now, are safe where you are. You can let the story stay far away. The desert is distant. The hangar is distant. The rumors are distant. Even the biggest what if is distant. Here in your room, the only thing that needs to be real is the steady rhythm of your body resting. Inhale, slow. Exhale, softer. And as you settle into that rhythm, let the myth remain what myths often are. A mirror. Not necessarily a window into hidden worlds, but a reflection of what humans hunger for. Wonder, meaning, connection, and the feeling that the universe hasn't run out of surprises. Now, many stories add one more figure to the scene. Not aliens, not scientists, not pilots, but people described in the plainest way, which somehow makes them even more uncanny. Men in plain clothes. It's a funny detail if you think about it. Plain clothes are by definition unremarkable. They're meant to blend in. And yet, in countless rumours and tales, the plainclothes figure becomes instantly recognisable. Not because of a uniform, but because of vibe. Because of posture. Because of the way the character behaves. In folklore, these figures are the modern equivalent of messengers who arrive after something strange happens. They don't appear in the middle of the event, but after, the way consequences arrive after choices. They show up in kitchens, on porches, in quiet offices. They ask questions in calm voices. They take notes. They are polite, but their politeness feels like a lid on something heavier. It's important to keep our feet on the ground here. A lot of men in plain clothes stories are just that, stories. They're part of the mythology. Sometimes they're exaggerations. Sometimes they're misunderstandings. Sometimes they're a way the mind gives a face to the abstract concept of authority. Because authority without a face is hard for the mind to hold. It becomes a fog. So the imagination condenses the fog into a person. A person is easier. A person can knock on a door. A person can lean slightly forward and make you feel small even if they never raise their voice. So in the shared narrative, the plainclothes figure becomes a symbol of the boundary between the public and the hidden. A symbol of the moment when a mystery becomes controlled, contained, routed back into the system. But bedtime doesn't need that to feel threatening. We can soften it. We can picture these figures not as villains, not as monsters, not as proof of anything. Just as silhouettes in the distance, part of the atmosphere the way a far-off street lamp is part of the night. In fact, if you imagine them the way you imagine background characters in a dream, they become less sharp. They lose their power. They become just forms moving through the scene, which is what most people are in most stories. Passing shapes, brief interactions, then gone. You can picture one of these figures stepping out of a car into desert darkness, not aggressively but carefully, closing the door with quiet respect for the night. You can picture them walking with purpose, not toward you, but away, back into the world of paperwork and procedure that you don't have to enter. Their shoes crunch lightly on gravel. Their outline crosses a pool of light, then disappears again. And you can let the idea of watchers dissolve, because you don't need watchers in your room. You don't need the feeling of being observed. You can return to what's true in the simplest sense. The only authority in your space right now is comfort. The only directive is rest. So let the plain clothes become plain in the best way. Unremarkable, unimportant, harmless. Let them fade into the same category as other distant things you don't need to manage. Faraway traffic, an airplane passing somewhere high, a news story you heard once and don't have to carry into the night. And then, gently, return to your own threshold. The real hangar door for you is the moment your thoughts stop chasing. The real underground levels are the depth of sleep. The real secret files are the dreams your mind will quietly generate without needing your supervision. So you can close the door now, not forcefully, softly, with the calm finality of someone turning off a light in a room that has done enough work for one day. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower, and let the desert, the hangars, the myths, and the figures in the distance remain exactly where they belong tonight, far away, while you drift toward the one secret place you enter effortlessly, every night: sleep. There's a detail that sneaks into a lot of Area 51 conversations that always feels oddly domestic. Not aliens, not crash recoveries, not underground cities, commuting. The idea that somewhere in the desert, behind rules and fences and distance, there are people who still have to wake up at a certain hour, drink something warm, put on clothes that feel like work clothes, and travel to a job the way anyone travels to a job. The idea that secrecy doesn't float in the air like magic, it arrives on a schedule. And there's something almost comforting about that image, because it pulls the story back down to earth. Commuting is one of the most normal human rituals we have. It's repetitive, it's unromantic. It doesn't suggest cosmic revelation, it suggests routines, traffic, early mornings, tired eyes, half-finished breakfasts, the quiet mental shift from home self to work self. Commuting is the sound of keys, the weight of a bag, the check-in of pockets for phone and wallet, the mild annoyance of having to be somewhere at all. So when people mention those plain, steady movements, people travelling in and out of a remote site day after day, it does something to the imagination. It turns the myth into a workplace, a real workplace, a place where someone might complain about the air conditioning being too cold, or the coffee being terrible, or the printer always jamming, or the meeting that should have been an email. Even if you don't know the details, the shape of the idea matters. Secrecy being maintained by ordinary humans. And that idea has a funny psychological effect. It shrinks the fear. Because it's hard to imagine a purely monstrous secret being managed entirely by people who still need lunch breaks. People who still go home and do laundry. People who still get headaches and have birthdays and worry about their kids. There's something about the mundane that deflates the overly dramatic. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't prove anything, but it softens the atmosphere. So you might picture it like this. Early morning, long before the desert heat wakes up. The sky's still dark blue, not quite night, not quite day. The stars are fading one by one, not switching off, just becoming invisible as the light slowly rises from behind distant mountains. The air's cool in that clean way deserts do so well, like a quiet glass of water. Somewhere far away from the base, somewhere more ordinary, there are lights in windows, people moving around kitchens, a kettle, a toaster, a chair scraping softly against a floor, a door opening and closing. Then travel, a ride, a vehicle, a plane, a bus, a route that becomes familiar to the people who take it. Not as a dramatic march into mystery, but as a practiced path into work. And when they arrive, however they arrive, the base isn't a temple, it's an infrastructure. It's a place built for tasks. It has procedures and safety protocols. It has tools and manuals and checklists. It has radios and schedules. It has careful, quiet competence. It is, in other words, a place where the extraordinary is often handled through the ordinary. That's how humans manage big things. We turn them into steps. We turn them into routines. We chop the unknown into smaller, knowable actions. Even if the work is highly advanced, the day-to-day has a rhythm. And rhythm is, to a sleepy mind, one of the most calming substances on earth. You can let that rhythm be part of the lullaby now. Imagine a hallway with soft lighting, not bright, not harsh, quiet. Imagine doors that open with badges. Imagine people speaking in low voices, not because they're plotting, but because quiet is professional. Imagine someone checking a gauge, someone reviewing a diagram, someone making sure a tool is returned to its place. The world of secrecy becomes less like a monster and more like a quiet shift on a night schedule. And that strangely makes the legend feel less invasive, less like something creeping toward you, more like something contained in its own distant ecosystem, which is exactly where it belongs tonight. Contained, far away, not your responsibility. Because your responsibility right now is much simpler: to rest. Now, when the story steps outside again, back into the open desert night, it often finds itself looking at lights. Lights are beautiful, but they can also be mischievous. In the desert, there is so much distance and so little clutter that a single light can pretend to be many things. A light can sit on a tower and still look like it's floating, especially when the ground is dark and your eyes can't easily read depth. A light can be a vehicle, a building, a star low on the horizon, a plane angled toward you, a reflection, an illusion shaped by heat, dust, and perspective. And because the desert is so open, you see lights that you would never see in a city, not because they're stranger, but because there's nothing else competing for your attention. At night, your pupils widen. Your vision shifts toward what's bright. The world becomes a high-contrast painting, deep blacks, pale greys, and small points of intensity. A single blinking light becomes an entire event. A steady light becomes a landmark. A moving light becomes a question. And your brain, faithful, eager, slightly dramatic, begins to interpret. It tries to decide, is it near or far? Is it fast or slow? Is it high or low? Is it one thing or multiple things? Is it moving toward you, away from you, or simply moving in a way that looks strange because the background offers no easy measuring stick? Sometimes the brain gets it right, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, the brain tries, because that's what it does. It can't help but turn sensory input into story. Now, if you're sleepy, you can experience those lights in a different way. Instead of treating them like clues, evidence, signals, messages, you can treat them like fireflies on a larger scale. Small points of brightness drifting through a dark landscape. You don't have to decode them. You can just watch them the way you watch waves or clouds, as motion that doesn't demand anything from you. Picture yourself standing somewhere safe, not too close to anything, just looking out into the night. The land is quiet, the air is cool, your hands might be in your pockets. You can feel the steady presence of the ground beneath you. A light appears far away. It blinks. It moves a little. Or maybe it doesn't move at all, but your eyes adjust and it seems to shift, the way stars seem to tremble when you stare too hard. Then another light, then none. The scene breathes, and you can breathe with it. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. A lot of the tension around strange lights comes from urgency. The mind says, I must know what that is right now. But urgency is a daytime habit. Nighttime can teach you a different relationship with not knowing. At night, you can let the unknown remain gently unopened. Like a letter you don't have to read until morning. Like a door you can walk past without entering. Like a thought you can notice without chasing. There's a particular peace in that, the peace of allowing the world to be larger than your understanding without it turning into threat. The desert can be full of distances you can't measure. The sky can be full of motions you can't interpret perfectly, and you can still be safe, you can still be calm. Because your safety doesn't depend on total knowledge. It depends on the simple truths of your present moment, your bed, your room, your breath, your body supported. So when the lights flicker in your imagination, let them flicker softly. Let them be just lights, not answers, not alarms, just points of brightness in a very big night. And from there, the story can drift into something quieter still, the idea of an archive. An archive room is a deeply unglamorous place, and yet it carries a special kind of power. It is a room built for holding paper, holding records, holding the slow, meticulous memory of institutions, holding the past in labelled boxes. If you've ever been in a library basement or an old office storage room, you know the feeling. The air is cooler, the lighting is steady and practical, the space smells faintly of cardboard, paper, and time. Everything is arranged in a way that suggests someone cared enough to remember, but not enough to make it pretty. And in the mythology of secret places, the archive room becomes almost sacred, not because it's mystical, but because it promises that the truth exists somewhere in a stable form. Not floating in rumours, not distorted by retellings, but sitting still in a folder, waiting. That is incredibly tempting to the mind. Because rumours are exhausting, they shift, they mutate, they argue with each other, they never settle. But a document feels solid, it feels fixed, it feels like a final answer frozen into ink. Of course, in real life, documents can be incomplete, biased, mistaken, or written in ways that obscure as much as they reveal. A paper can be true and still not tell the whole story. A report can be accurate and still be narrow. But the feeling of an archive is calming because it suggests containment, it suggests order, it suggests that the world's chaos can be sorted into boxes and labels and timelines. And once again, Bedtime loves order. So imagine the archive room not as a vault of shocking secrets, but as a quiet chamber where everything is neatly put away. A room that doesn't buzz with danger, but hums with stillness. Long shelves, cardboard boxes, file folders, each one labelled with words that mean almost nothing to you, which is part of the calm. You don't have to understand them, you don't have to open them. You can simply walk through this imagined room the way you might walk through a museum when you're too tired to read every plaque. The boxes are not demanding attention, they're just there. And in this room, the whole Area 51 story becomes less like a thrilling mystery and more like a record of human effort. Aviation projects, logistics, budgets, maintenance, test schedules, small engineering problems solved over time. Even the most advanced technology in the end tends to leave behind ordinary artifacts, notes, sketches, checklists, the paper trail of human work. And there's something quietly reassuring about that. It means the world is made by humans, and humans are not made of pure shadow. Humans are made of habits and documentation, and the need to write things down. Now, in the cultural imagination, the archive room also contains another kind of record. Stories. The other archive. Not the official archive, the human archive, the folk archive. Interviews, late-night callers, anecdotes from friends of friends, photographs that might be misinterpreted, accounts that might be sincere but mistaken, rumours that might be built on a true seed, and tales that might be pure invention. These live side by side in the imagination with the official records, because both are attempts to do the same thing, preserve meaning. The official archive preserves data, the human archive preserves feeling, and at bedtime feelings are often more important than data. So you can let yourself drift in this archive room without picking sides. You don't have to decide which shelf is realer. You can simply notice. There are many ways humans try to remember, and many ways humans try to explain. Some explanations are technical, some are poetic, some are wrong, some are half right, some are just coping mechanisms dressed up as certainty. And all of that can be held gently, like objects wrapped in tissue paper, placed in boxes and slid onto shelves. You don't have to unpack them now, you can let them rest. And as you let them rest, the story naturally wants to do one last thing. Descend. Not into underground levels full of drama, but into quiet, into closing time, into the moment when the archive room's lights are switched off, when the building becomes just a shape in the night, when even the shelves and boxes seem to relax because they're not being looked at. That's the kind of descent we want now, a final descent away from investigation, away from forcing meaning, away from reaching, back toward your body, back toward your pillow, back toward the simple truth that sleep is the most peaceful, classified section you'll ever enter. Because sleep is a place your conscious mind cannot fully supervise. You can't carry a flashlight into it and insist on seeing everything. You can't keep every file open at once. Sleep asks you to close tabs, to let your screens go dark, to hand control back to something deeper and older in you. So imagine the desert again, but quieter this time. The fence line is far away, thin as a thought. The hangars are closed. The lights in the distance are fewer now, softer, like someone turned the dimmer down on the whole world. The sky's enormous and steady, not dramatic, not urgent, just present. Your mind might still want to ask questions because that's what minds do. It might still want to reach back toward the story and pull at it. But you can give your mind a substitute. You can give it something simple to focus on, the rhythm of breath. Inhale gently, a little slower than you usually do. Exhale, longer, like you're letting air out of a balloon as carefully as possible. Inhale, soft. Exhale, softer. Let the exhale do most of the work because the exhale is the body's natural release signal. It tells your system we're safe enough to loosen. Now let the story become even farther away. The archive room closes its door. The shelves go dark. The boxes stay on their silent rows, undisturbed, unpublished, unproven, simply stored. The lights in the desert become tiny, then tinier. The sky becomes the main thing. The stars don't demand interpretation. They don't want you to win an argument. They don't need you to choose a theory. They simply exist, quiet and remote and steady, like the world's oldest lullaby. And finally, the most comforting thought of all, whatever is hidden out there, whatever is real, whatever is rumor, whatever is misunderstood, whatever is myth, it can remain out there tonight. You don't need to carry it into bed. You don't need to solve it to deserve rest. You don't need to know everything to be safe. The desert can keep its distance. The files can stay filed. The lights can blink without explanation. The stories can remain stories. And you can do the simplest thing, perhaps the wisest thing, your body has always known how to do. You can let go. Feel the weight of yourself sinking into the support beneath you. Let your face relax. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders drop as if they've been given permission. Your thoughts can become slower, like footsteps in soft sand. And if any last images remain, a hangar door, a distant light, a folder with black bars, you can let them blur at the edges, the way images blur right before a dream begins. Because now the night isn't asking you to be a detective, it's asking you to be a sleeper. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. And somewhere far away the desert lies quietly under the stars, vast and patient, while you drift inward, into warmth, into darkness that feels safe, into a place with no fences at all.